For decades, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, was the royal family's quiet enigma, a woman ever present yet rarely heard, whose grace was matched only by her silence. Behind the palace gates, she walked among monarchs and heirs as both confidant and observer, rarely drawing attention, never stirring controversy. But that silence has now shattered with 6 chilling words: "I saw everything." The world froze. The press, long dismissive of her influence, suddenly scrambled. That calm, composed voice, once dismissed as background noise, now carried a weight that threatened to tilt the monarchy itself. What secrets has Sophie held on to all these years? And what storm has her truth now unleashed? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It wasn't just what Sophie said, it was how she said it. There was no anger, no spectacle, only a quiet finality. The kind of tone that signals something irreversible. Within hours of her statement, tensions erupted behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace. Advisors were seen whispering urgently, and royal aides suddenly stopped giving interviews. Something had changed. The invisible royal had become the most powerful voice in the room. For years, Sophie had been the bridge between generations, trusted by Queen Elizabeth, respected by Princess Anne, and unthreatening to Catherine. She had no thirst for power, and that's what made her words even more damning. Because Sophie never speaks unless there's something she can't remain silent about. The build-up to this moment hadn't gone unnoticed. For months, subtle signs hinted at something brewing. Sophie's sudden withdrawal from select royal events, her absence during key photo opportunities, an offhanded comment in a charity interview where she said, "Some truths outlive the silence." Many dismissed it. But insiders now confess it was a warning. She was preparing the world for a reckoning. The moment she emerged from her car at the palace gates, the media was already unsettled. Cameras clicked wildly, expecting a routine appearance. Instead, they got history. Her lips parted, and she said it again. "I saw everything." And with that, the questions multiplied. What had she seen? What truth was the palace hiding? And why now? Whispers flooded the royal corridors. Was this about succession? About the Queen's final instructions? Or was there a deeper betrayal festering within the firm? Sophie's calm delivery belied the storm she had set off. But it wasn't just the public reacting behind the gilded doors. Royals who once dismissed her as peripheral now felt the ground shift beneath them. Her voice had weight, her presence had purpose, and her revelations were only just beginning. But Sophie wasn't just breaking her silence, she was unearthing buried truths. And what came next would shake the monarchy to its foundations. What the public sees is polished. What Sophie saw was peril. Her testimony unlocked a vault of inner-circle secrets, revealing whispered alliances, unseen betrayals, and a royal family at war with itself. What power struggle was kept so tightly under wraps, and who stood to lose everything? While the cameras were focused on pageantry, Sophie's eyes had always been locked on the politics behind the curtains. And now, she was naming names. In her testimony, she didn't hesitate. She identified the very architects of the ongoing succession storm. At the heart of it stood 2 figures once thought to be united by blood and purpose, King Charles and Prince William. Sophie claimed their bond had fractured long before the public noticed, a rift widened by conflicting visions of the monarchy's future. While Charles clung to tradition and loyalty to his queen consort, William quietly built a future that looked radically different, leaner, younger, and centered around a woman not named Camilla. Sophie's account painted a chilling portrait of late-night standoffs and secret summits between father and son. According to her, behind closed doors, the monarchy wasn't preparing for stability, it was bracing for survival. What truly ignited the fire, Sophie suggested, was Catherine's meteoric rise within royal ranks. A figure of grace and resilience, she became the favoured face of a modern monarchy, something that didn't sit well with certain power players. Sophie revealed moments of cold silence at events, whispers exchanged behind Catherine's back, and the way Camilla's influence was strategically expanded in direct counterbalance. The tension was no longer subtle, it was strategy. Sophie's testimony didn't just reveal discord, It exposed a calculated tug-of-war for the soul of the crown. Even more damning was Sophie's reference to a document, a piece of paper so explosive it had allegedly been locked away in a secure cabinet since Queen Elizabeth's final days. Sophie claimed she had read it with her own eyes. A document drafted in urgency, bearing the seal of the late Queen, expressing concern over growing divisions and outlining alternative succession protocols. The wording, she said, wasn't vague. It named individuals. It predicted friction. It warned of what might come if unity failed. This wasn't just hearsay. This was the monarchy's own cautionary letter to itself, and it had been buried. The palace, as expected, neither confirmed nor denied the existence of such a document. But Sophie's revelations sparked immediate reactions, press blackouts, strategic photo opportunities to display unity, and hurried statements from insiders denying any feud. But the public wasn't buying it. The weight of Sophie's words, the sheer composure with which she spoke, left no room for interpretation. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering, and every recollection added fuel to the firestorm, now roaring through royal halls. But secrets alone don't collapse a legacy. What truly rattled the crown was Sophie's next explosive revelation, hidden in plain sight for years. Everything we believed about the line of succession may be a lie. Sophie's testimony didn't just suggest a shift, it detailed how and when the royal plan was rewritten. Was there a covert royal strategy to bypass Camilla's lineage altogether? And was Prince William part of it? According to Sophie, the turning point came in 2017, a year now stained with significance. That was when, behind tightly sealed palace doors, an emergency succession revision document was allegedly drafted. Sophie claimed she had seen it with her own eyes. It wasn't theory, it was protocol, signed and prepared under what she described as conditions of anticipated instability. The document, she said, wasn't just a plan, it was a safeguard, a contingency blueprint that revealed an internal belief that the crown could no longer rely on public favor alone. What stunned everyone was not its existence, but its implications. It didn't elevate Camilla or her heirs, it strategically bypassed them entirely. And at the center of this silent reordering stood not Charles but Catherine. The revelations didn't end with paper. Sophie spoke of private conversations, whispers exchanged between her and the late Queen Elizabeth II in the twilight months of the monarch's reign. These weren't casual chats over tea. Sophie described them as structured, deliberate, and at times emotional. The Queen, aware of shifting tides within her own family, allegedly expressed concern over fractured loyalty and misplaced ambition. In these conversations, according to Sophie, the Queen voiced her hope that the future would be secured not just through blood, but through character. And that hope, Sophie hinted, had a name, Catherine. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to fit. In recent years, many noticed the unusual emphasis placed on Princess Charlotte's education, her heightened public exposure, and the subtle grooming of a child who by traditional order was third in line. But what if that positioning wasn't symbolic? What if it was preparatory? Sophie's statement pointed directly to this, hinting that Charlotte may have been chosen early as part of a long-term plan to establish a new matriarchal strength within the monarchy, an unspoken heir apparent, crafted in the image of both her mother and her great-grandmother. And then came the most controversial suggestion of all, that Camilla's lineage, her children, her grandchildren, were never part of any serious internal succession conversation. Not by oversight, but by design. Sophie alluded to moments of conflict between Charles and his sister, Princess Anne, particularly surrounding this exclusion. Anne, fiercely protective of royal legacy, allegedly opposed any attempt to elevate non-royal bloodlines into positions of influence. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about preserving the crown's sanctity, and Anne, by Sophie's account, was prepared to fight for it, even if it meant clashing with her own brother. In the end, Sophie's testimony didn't just expose a rift, it drew a new map of power, one that placed Catherine not as a passive consort, but as the silent architect of a future monarchy. A woman not waiting in line but already leading from the shadows. And if that revelation cracked the firmament of royal tradition, The next one set it ablaze. If Sophie's words stunned the public, her next move left royal insiders gasping for breath because she named names and pointed fingers. Sophie wasn't just revealing history, she was risking her future. Someone inside the palace allegedly tried to stop her. Threats, isolation, and erased communications. What was so dangerous in Sophie's truth that certain royals allegedly plotted to shut her down? From the moment Queen Elizabeth passed, the silence around Sophie became almost deafening. Royal watchers noted her sudden disappearance from certain events, her name quietly omitted from official press briefings, and her long-standing engagements unexpectedly reassigned. At first, it looked like grief. But now, in light of her testimony, that absence feels eerily strategic. According to Sophie, it was no coincidence. She spoke of strange calls, late-night knocks, and conversations that ended abruptly when certain names were mentioned. She hinted at a campaign of subtle but deliberate intimidation, initiated by those desperate to keep buried what the Queen had once shared with her in confidence. It wasn't just emotional pressure, it was institutional, cold, and calculated. One of the most chilling claims Sophie made was the mysterious disappearance of several sensitive documents and voice recordings allegedly stored under her supervision. These items, believed to include memos from the Queen, private notes from Princess Anne, and even correspondence with royal advisors, vanished without explanation. Digital backups were inexplicably corrupted, physical files no longer where they were last seen, but the cover-up didn't stop there. An anonymous former palace staffer came forward via a legal intermediary with a statement confirming that Sophie had been under increasing scrutiny by senior officials since 2022. The staffer described a coordinated effort to protect the family from fragmentation, which in practice meant silencing dissent from within. Then came the message. Sophie received it late one night, anonymous, untraceable, and devastating in its implication. Just 7 words. Don't be the next Diana. Stay silent. It shook her. Not because of the threat itself, but because of what it implied. That her voice, like Diana's before her, was seen as a destabilizing force. The palace had long feared the power of one woman telling the truth. Sophie now stood in that legacy. But unlike Diana, Sophie had waited. She had observed, and she knew exactly where to strike. It wasn't emotion, it was precision. She wasn't running to the press. She was dismantling a fortress, brick by brick. At the heart of the effort to silence her, Sophie subtly pointed to one figure, a senior royal advisor known for managing crisis strategy across the Windsor family. She never spoke his name outright, but her wording was clear enough for insiders to connect the dots. This advisor, she suggested, had orchestrated much of the containment, possibly even informing Charles and Camilla without William's full knowledge. It was a chessboard of manipulation, with Sophie cornered but not conquered. Despite everything, despite the erasures, the warnings, the walls closing in, Sophie chose to go public. Not with scandal, but with quiet clarity. Her resilience wasn't loud. It was unshakable. She made a decision to speak not out of vengeance, but out of duty to a queen's dying wishes, to the future of the crown, and to the truth that could no longer stay hidden. With the dam broken, Sophie's words spread faster than damage control could contain, and then she dropped the bombshell that turned royal history upside down. In an unprecedented twist, Sophie named Queen Camilla, directly accusing her of orchestrating maneuvers to elevate her own bloodline in the royal future. Was this the moment Camilla's carefully constructed image began to crack under scrutiny? For years, Camilla had played the part with calculated grace, publicly humble, quietly supportive, always portraying herself as a background figure to Charles's reign. But according to Sophie, that narrative was nothing more than a carefully spun illusion. In her boldest claim yet, Sophie laid out a pattern of back-channel influence that pointed directly to Camilla's hand. Succession advisors, Sophie alleged, had received persistent and pointed pressure from Camilla to adjust the future framework of the monarchy, not in favor of William or Catherine, but with a subtle tilt toward her own descendants. It wasn't about a title, it was about legacy, and behind closed doors, it had become a battle for who would shape the next generation of royal power. The tension reportedly boiled over when Camilla allegedly attempted to access private notes and correspondence left behind by Queen Elizabeth documents believed to express the late monarch's personal wishes for the future. Sophie claimed that multiple requests were made through unofficial channels to review these letters, and that resistance to granting access sparked a quiet war inside the palace. It was no longer a matter of respect for tradition. It had become a scramble for narrative control. If the Queen had indeed favoured a different direction for the crown, then those words, those final instructions, had the power to dismantle everything Camilla had positioned herself for. Even more shocking was the claim that Camilla had lobbied, discreetly but deliberately, for her grandchildren to be considered in discussions about future ceremonial roles and honorary titles. According to Sophie, there were conversations never public, always guarded, where Camilla floated the idea that her lineage should not be entirely excluded from royal life. It was, in Sophie's words, an attempt to rewrite the order of inheritance through influence, not blood. While never outwardly defiant of William and Catherine's position, Camilla's private moves painted a different picture. Behind palace walls, allegiances shifted, old alliances fractured, and the unspoken feud between Camilla and Catherine began to burn quietly but fiercely. In the midst of this, King Charles found himself cornered by consequence. Sophie revealed that he was made aware of the escalating tensions and yet did little to intervene. Whether out of loyalty, fear of scandal, or weariness from a lifetime of conflict, Charles's inaction only deepened the divide. Sophie's account exposed a monarch who had become a bystander in the battle for his own legacy, watching as two powerful women reshaped the battlefield beneath his feet. And as Sophie's revelations spread beyond the palace gates, the public began to take notice. Social media lit up, polls shifted, headlines turned from deference to doubt. Camilla, once tolerated, now stood under a magnifying glass, and Sophie, the once ignored royal, had become the voice that pierced through the silence. But she wasn't finished, because in her possession was a final letter that could rewrite the royal family's future forever. The late Queen Elizabeth II left behind many official words, but one private letter may carry more weight than all her speeches combined. According to Sophie, this final message wasn't addressed to Charles, it was addressed to Catherine. In the final months of her reign, as frailty crept into the Queen's voice, and the reality of a looming transition became undeniable, she began to make preparations not just for the institution, but for the soul of the crown. Sophie, ever the silent sentinel, was summoned to a private meeting at Windsor. It was there, Sophie claimed, that the Queen handed her a sealed envelope, unmarked, unadorned, but unbearably heavy with implication. "When the time is right," the Queen had said, "you'll know what to do." That time, Sophie decided, had finally come. The contents of that letter, according to Sophie's testimony, did not include titles, instructions, or ceremonial protocols. They were not about power, but about purpose. The Queen wrote with conviction and clarity words that laid bare her true hope for the future. It was not Charles who was named as the enduring light of the monarchy. It was Catherine. In the letter, the Queen reportedly described Catherine as the embodiment of grace under fire, someone who had endured not for applause, but for responsibility. The phrase that echoed through Sophie's voice as she read from memory was chilling. Charlotte's destiny rests in her mother's example. It is through a maternal throne that stability will be restored. Sophie revealed that when she handed the letter to Catherine weeks after the Queen's funeral, the reaction was beyond words. Catherine wept not out of fear or pressure, but from the weight of being seen. In a world where ambition is often mistaken for loyalty, Catherine had remained steadfast, even when the shadows around her grew darker. And now, in the Queen's final message, that quiet resilience had been acknowledged as the foundation of the Crown's next chapter. The monarchy, in the Queen's view, was no longer just about bloodline, it was about character. And Catherine, in her silence, had earned what many had tried to seize through noise. But the letter did something else. It validated Sophie. For decades, she had played the long game, watching, listening, protecting. And in that envelope, the Queen had entrusted her with more than words, she had entrusted her with legacy. It was this moment, Sophie admitted, that pushed her to speak. The silence, once her armor, had become a prison. The truth had to be told, not just to defend Catherine, but to honor the Queen's final hope. This letter wasn't a secret, it was a signal, a call to action. With the Queen's final wishes now public, the monarchy faced a reckoning, and one royal insider took a drastic step that stunned even Sophie. Princess Anne, once known as the steely, silent pillar of tradition, broke rank. After Sophie's testimony, Anne's reaction wasn't just approval, it was action. Behind closed doors, she made a move that shifted royal power toward an unlikely alliance. In a family that survives on discretion, Princess Anne has always been the fortress, unshakable, unreadable, and unwavering in her loyalty to the institution. But even the fortress, it seems, has its limits. Following Sophie's explosive revelations and the release of the Queen's final letter, Anne did something she hadn't done in decades. She spoke. Not in a long speech or televised interview, but in a single razor-sharp statement. Even when it's uncomfortable. Those 14 words sent shockwaves through the palace. Anne had taken a side, and that side became clear just days later when a private meeting took place at Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's own estate, far from the photographers and formalities of London. There, in the quiet countryside, Anne, Sophie and Catherine met for what insiders now call the Unity Summit. No staff, no statements, just three women bound not by politics, but by purpose. Rumours immediately swirled that the meeting wasn't merely a gesture of support, it was strategic. Anne was said to be re-evaluating elements of her estate and long-term royal influence, including the controversial decision to leave several honorary roles and patronages directly in the hands of Princess Charlotte. It wasn't protocol, it was precedent, quietly being rewritten. Behind palace walls, the impact was seismic. During a heated private council session, Anne reportedly refused to back Camilla's proposed changes to ceremonial arrangements for the next royal generation. According to one insider, Anne made it clear, "There are lines I will not cross, and loyalties I will not fake." Her refusal to play along with the carefully curated image of unity confirmed what many had feared: there was a civil war unfolding within the monarchy, and sides had been chosen. What made this alliance even more potent was its foundation in history. The mutual respect between Anne and Sophie wasn't manufactured for convenience. It had been quietly building over years of shared duty, sacrifice, and survival in a male-dominated institution. Where others schemed, they endured. Where others sought applause, they worked in silence. And now, with Catherine stepping into a new level of influence, the trio represented something the monarchy hadn't seen in generations, a matriarchal force powerful enough to challenge centuries of tradition. They weren't rebelling. They were restoring. Together, they created what royal commentators have dubbed the matriarchal trinity, a stabilizing, strategic core of women who prioritized duty over drama, legacy over ego. It wasn't about overthrowing the system, it was about anchoring it in truth. But even as allies rose and the royal winds began to shift, danger brewed just beyond the walls. Because Sophie's next revelation wasn't just disruptive, it would tear through the very laws of succession and force the palace into uncharted territory. But while allies rose, threats multiplied, and one final revelation from Sophie would throw the line of succession into absolute chaos. Buried in royal protocol was a clause long ignored, almost erased until Sophie unearthed it. A forgotten royal directive gives Prince William one terrifying choice: accept the crown on a conditional term or pass it entirely to his daughter. As Sophie's testimony sent tremors through the monarchy, she revealed one last piece of information that stopped even seasoned royal advisors in their tracks. Hidden deep within a 1917 wartime amendment created during the turbulence of George V's reign lay a little-known clause that permitted the heir to the throne to name an alternative successor under conditions of national or institutional instability. It had never been used. It was drafted for a scenario that was, at the time, thought impossible. But the institution had changed, and so had the world. Now, more than a century later, that clause was no longer theoretical, it was relevant. And with Sophie's official testimony, it had just been reactivated. According to Sophie, this obscure legal detail was raised in a private discussion between herself and Queen Elizabeth in early 2022. The Queen, aware of the increasing complexity within the royal household and mounting public divisions, quietly referenced the clause as the Crown's final safeguard. It was never about removing Charles. It was about giving William a choice, one that could allow for a peaceful transition without destabilizing the nation. But that choice came with consequences. Accept the crown and bear its full burden, or pass it to a successor who represents the future without the baggage of the past. And in that shadowed path stood one name: Charlotte. Insiders now suggest William has been quietly grappling with this decision for months. He is torn between two powerful instincts, duty to his father's legacy, and a growing belief that the future might be better served by a monarch raised entirely in the modern age. Catherine, according to sources close to the family, has become a steadying influence in that storm. It's not that she's pushing for Charlotte, it's that she understands the toll the throne exacts, and she sees in her daughter a chance to build something less fractured, less politicized, something that honors tradition without being consumed by it. But reactivating this clause isn't a matter of opinion. It requires formal acknowledgement, public record, and testimony by a key royal witness. Sophie's declaration triggered that process. Her account, verified and submitted to a royal advisory council, made the clause active once more. Legal scholars and constitutional advisors scrambled to determine its implications. But one truth became clear. The succession was no longer guaranteed. For the first time in living memory, the throne was a question mark. Speculation erupted. Could Charlotte truly ascend so soon? Would William step aside not in shame, but in strategic retreat? Was this the Queen's ultimate plan all along, quietly laying the foundation for a monarchy built not on hierarchy, but on harmony? These weren't just what-ifs. They were now real possibilities because one woman dared to speak, one clause was dusted off, and one family stood on the brink of rewriting its own destiny. As the world reeled from the implications, one question echoed through palaces and press rooms alike. Was Sophie's role truly finished, or had she just begun? Sophie Wessex, once dismissed as a peripheral figure, is now the central witness in the royal family's most turbulent era. But was her testimony a final act of loyalty, or a declaration of quiet rebellion? And what does the future hold for a monarchy forever changed by one woman's truth? She entered the royal fold without noise, expectation, or drama. For decades, she remained in the background, supportive, dutiful, and dependable. But the woman once overlooked became the very force that pulled back the veil on the monarchy's most hidden fractures. Sophie's transformation from silent observer to historic whistleblower wasn't born of ambition, it was born of necessity. Her revelations didn't come from a place of resentment, but of responsibility. She had seen too much, heard too many promises broken, and read too many words never meant to see the light. When she finally chose to speak, it wasn't to destroy the monarchy, it was to save it from eating itself alive. In the aftermath of her testimony, the image of the royal family shifted irrevocably. What remained was something far more human, a family bruised, splintered, and learning to rebuild. The world had seen the cracks, and strangely, it seemed to care more. For once, it wasn't just about crowns and castles, it was about conscience. And at the center of that transformation stood 4 women, each playing a role in reshaping the foundation. Catherine, the calm architect of the future. Charlotte, the symbol of generational promise. Anne, the unshakable guardian of legacy. And Sophie, the catalyst whose courage gave rise to it all. Sophie's quiet war was not waged with power plays or headlines. It was waged with truth, memory, and a relentless refusal to let history be buried beneath convenience. Her retreat from the public eye after delivering her final statement felt less like disappearance and more like completion. She had done what she came to do. She had honored the Queen's final wishes, She had protected those who needed protecting. And she had made sure that what was whispered in private would never again be hidden from the world. It wasn't about staying in the spotlight, it was about turning it in the right direction before stepping away. But just as the dust seemed to settle, one final twist lingered, an unopened file, sealed, and left in the possession of her daughter, Lady Louise. No one knows what it contains. Some say it holds the last conversations Sophie had with the Queen. Others believe it contains yet another piece of royal history, one that might one day demand its own reckoning. But for now, it remains locked, untouched. A silent reminder that even when the speaking stops, the story may not be over. And so, with a whisper louder than any proclamation, Sophie Wessex altered the crown's course not with force, but with truth. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.